YouTubes, Mark Daniel Nelson here with Make Mine Music. Want to talk to you about something. One of the main emails I get is, do I use parallel compression? And for people that don't really know what parallel compression is, I'll just explain it really fast. Parallel compression is taking one signal, duplicating that signal in a way, processing the other signal, and blending it into the natural signal. A lot of people like to use that to bring up body, bring up harmonic, distortion, bring up energy without affecting the main track. So let's say you have a drum set that is really cool, but you want it to sound a little more explosive without it to sounding explosive artifact-wise with all this compression and distortion. Now there's a few names for parallel compression. There is New York style compression, which is what I grew up thinking that's what it was called, upward compression, and parallel compression or serial compression, which you would do with two sources. Some people like to do it with the plugin and the mix knob, and some people like to send it off to a separate track inside the box or outside the box and blend to their taste. I have an old track here by a band from Chicago that I'm not sure is together anymore, but I absolutely love them. They were called They All Have Legs. They're phenomenal, just energy, groovy, fun, great band. The one thing I remember having an issue with this session was that if you can see here, there's not a ton of tracks, but there was just a lot going on and a lot of people playing in the same registers, and the drums were busy, and Josh's vocal was above the track but needed to stay more energized. And how I was able to achieve kind of some separation and some more energy without it just sounding clamped down and compressed was to do parallel compression. So today I'm going to share with you 4 of my favorite settings for parallel compression. These are settings that I usually keep completely static, and I just drive into it and then I blend to taste afterwards. But I will go through each kind of group of instruments that I use it on. Usually it's just drums, vocals, piano, and guitars. I want you to listen to how each individual instrument is kind of coming in and out and then tucking when something else is going. Now, the cool thing about this track is it's all about the jam. It's all about the players playing together. There's little elements in the guitars going left. There's a harpsichord going on the right. There's a cello going that's just more bedding with the bass. And then there's Josh, very simple vocal, but has vibe. And it's a band just playing. And it's something we don't see very often anymore. And it really makes me miss hearing more music like this. So I want to dive in a little bit and talk about the processes. We only have 2 acoustic guitars, 2 electric guitars, a harpsichord, a cello, a bass, drums, and a vocal. That's it. But I felt like for this track, I remember it not having the energy it needed to get. It needed to have a little more kind of breathing and a little more flow. And without the parallel compression, it just kind of sounded flat. It didn't sound bad. It just sounded kind of flat. And so by introducing the parallel compression to the guitars, to the drums, the vocals, and the harpsichord, it ended up making things sound a little more energized and just flat out cool. For this track, the 2 main acoustic guitars are the kind of meat and potatoes of the track. Other than the drums and bass, what's happening is the energy is happening with the acoustics. Now, if I take out the parallel compression, before I show you what it is, let's hear what it does. This is without parallel compression or anything. And then I'll put it in. super duper subtle, but what it's doing is it's adding this energy where it's keeping things lifting in front instead of having them kind of go back without compressing the snot out of it. So out. And then in. Okay, let's pull in what we actually have on this exact setting. For the guitars, we have something very, very slight. And I will pull up the track. We have this Klanghelm distortion, the SDRR. And now what this guy does is super different than a lot of the other harmonic boxes. And I'm using some of the compression settings in it. I'm using a little bit of the sharp transient in it. I'm rolling off some bottom end. I'm actually adding some top end. And I'm going through the distortion on the transistor desk. I believe that's the setting I'm using. Now, if we just listen to it on its own, it's going to be kind of quiet. But all I have it doing is hitting a DBX 160 and distorting. Now, blending then the two, you're going to get a little more sheen because I'm boosting the treble. So let's just hear it by itself. So that's what the affected compression's happening. Now that's without anything. So if you look at the two, it's distorting a bit. It's adding a little bit of snap from the compression. And then it's adding a little bit more from the actual 160. Now the thing with that is you're starting to hear the distortion and stuff. And that kind of actually makes me a little irritable. So in the track, all I really wanted to achieve with the acoustic guitars is kind of bring up some of the top end sheen without adding too much harshness. I didn't feel like it was pokey. I just felt like it needed some kind of, overall brightness with some harmonic content, creating some kind of movement. So that does work. That's that setting. Let's go down to the drums. And now the drums have samples as well as the actual acoustic tracking drums. But the cool thing about this guy is if I take out the parallel completely, this is what the drums sound like. Now with the actual parallel compression, again, very subtle if I bring it up. Now out, in. This is another one of those things where it's super subtle, but if what you're hearing is what you're hearing, it feels like things are, again, leaning forward. The snare is a little more squashed. There's a little more fur on things with it sounding too clamped down. Again, I'm using the Klanghelm SDRR2. This time I'm using it in the tube setting. I'm going into the next Klanghelm compressor, the DC8C3, which is a super cool compressor, very affordable, very unique, and then into the harmonic culture vulture that adds a tiny bit more grit. So if I solo the drum channel, that this is just strictly the parallel channel, it sounds like this. Now, if you can go back and see what I'm using, I'm just going after my sample snare, my kick sample, because those are two clean things without a lot of bleed and stuff. And then a bit of overheads. Let's take out one at a time. Here's the first SDRR. A little cleaner. Let's take out the next in line, the DC8C compressor. And then let's take out the harmonic culture vulture. One thing to consider when you're doing this is phase. Now, usually some people like to put the compressor on the bus of the drums and then use the mix knob to blend it. I'm okay with phase for this because I'm using the phase to my advantage. I'm listening to the low end. I'm listening to how the kick and the low mid of the snare is coming in and out of phase. Because honestly, when you're sending stuff into an auxiliary track, the delay on it and the delay of the plugins will always be a little bit more than if you had it directly in line with the drums. Now this adds some of the energy, some of the sound. Depending on the track, I'll go between the two. But in general, I actually like using these 4 settings in the aux set versus the insert because it just sounds different and you play with the phase and it's okay. And the next thing down the line I want to go over is my piano parallel setting. Now this is a harpsichord track, but I still use the exact same piano setting as I would if it's a normal grand or an upright. Now I actually have another piano track I can play after this that's a little slower that I can talk to you about why I use the parallel on piano. But for this, the harpsichord had a lot of cool little noodles that I wanted to kind of showcase without having to do a ton of writing. So by using parallel compression on this harpsichord, it let me create a lot of the movement that it needed to stick in its pocket and then pull back when needed. Let's take a listen to that. We're just listening strictly to the parallel of the harpsichord. This is my favorite parallel box for piano, and I usually don't touch it. I have a little bit of the boost in the top end, a little mid-range, and I'm compressing the snot out of it. Now what I'm doing here is adding a lot of the thrust and distortion back into it. You can hear it sustaining more than it would without it. That's without it. Now you can hear the actual panning change, and that's okay because the way I have this set up, I have it in the center. So what I'm doing is getting the parallel in the dead center and then the dry signal on the right side, and it's causing a nice little balance sound. And on grand pianos, it's even more special. I'll get into that in a bit, but let's go over the vocal first. I'm going to go into the verse again and talk to you about what I got on the vocal. And then take off the parallel with the vocal. And then back on. Once again, you're hearing that the vocal is staying on top of things while everything else is going out. Love this CLA 76. This is a very unique 1176. I think that Chris uses specifically for his vocal compressor normally on his outboard gear. The cool thing about that box is it's real spitty. It's very different than the other ones in the sense of all 1176s do not sound the same. This one has a lot of spit, a lot of snappy kind of thing when you hit it hard with the vocal. So sometimes I put the de-esser on, sometimes I take it off if it doesn't need it on the parallel, but I have it on here because it seemed to tuck the S's a little bit. I also added, again, the culture vulture, just a little bit, to add a little bit of harmonic noise. Always late and time will pass. Walk your plank without the harmonic and de-esser. Turn around way too close. Feast and rings, let him go. Mystery day and turn to snow. Let me take it in and out again so you can hear what the vocal's doing on the verse. Way too close. Feast and rings. See how everything's kind of over top the vocal now with it off? Now the vocal's sitting above everything. But still feels like there's air and space. He doesn't like the way they taste. Jimmy doesn't like his shoes, he doesn't like the way they hold him in. Very cool. Before I leave you guys with some fun, I want to give you the session for this for you guys to screw around because it's such a cool song and it doesn't have a ton of tracks with it. And I also want to give you the 4 parallel settings that I use so you can either build on it, use it as is, or make it your own. Before I let you go, I want to open up one last thing on the piano and show you a really cool thing about my parallel piano track and why I think it's super special on a grand piano, not just a harpsichord. One of my favorite pianos of all time, the grand piano on the album Songs for the West Coast, Elton John. If you go back and listen to that album, the pianos are outstanding, just incredible punch. And I think a lot of that is the parallel compression, the upward compression, the New York compression, the serial compression that's used on the piano. Anyone who's mixed knows that when you put a compressor on a piano, it just doesn't sound very pleasing unless you're going after that extreme effect. Sometimes you want it to be a little more edgy, but retain all of its beauty and its body without having all this pump, this distortion and stuff. And I feel that parallel compression does an incredible job at achieving that. So my settings for that, again, is the EMI Waves TG12345 plugin. This is an EQ and a limiter compressor, and putting it in and out on the grand piano will show you exactly what it's doing. Push it a little too hard, it starts getting that color. It actually sounds pretty rad. Without it, again, it's keeping things up front without it sounding too clamped down and limited. Another ace in the hole for me. Enjoy yourself mixing the track and have a great time. This is a great song, perfect example of parallel compression. Fool around, screw around, break some stuff, and just have fun. See you later.